Good afternoon, and welcome back to another session on my Declassified Caribbean channel, News and Commentary Network. And make sure that you are sharing the videos and that you are liking the videos so that the platform, that's the algorithm, will be able to send the videos along the platform system. We do not know how long we have left in this world as we know it, because things are happening at a very rapid pace, and it's very difficult sometimes to keep up or to keep abreast of what is happening in the world. And many of us are going to be, caught off guard because we're not following, we don't understand. And I'm here as much as possible to explain and to break down what is happening. The war on Cuba and Venezuela, Agenda 2030, and the militarization of the Caribbean. That is what we're going to be looking at. Many of us are seeing the impending, I should say, invasion of Cuba as just, about Cuba. And people are suggesting, why does the United States need to use Jamaica when it has Guantanamo Bay? Do you understand how warfares are fought? All right, they have to cover every base. Right? In wars, they have to cover every base, and that's exactly what the United States of America is doing, making sure that all bases are covered, surveillance systems. But in addition to that, I must also properly inform you that this is not just a war on Cuba or a war on Venezuela. It is a war on the entire world. The United States is waging a war on the entire world, including the Caribbean region. And you need to wake up. You think this is just about Cuba. Oh, we don't want any war here. It is war against you two. And that is why they're sending these vessels there, these large-scale vessels, whether to Tobago or to Jamaica and Kingston. That is what they are doing. And you think they're just, there to promote bilateral agreements. That is not. And that might be some part of the surface meaning. And they're indeed, showcasing their cultural differences and enjoying themselves. But at the end of the day, we have to look beneath the surface and begin to become critical thinkers and analytic people, right? That is what I forgot the word. So we have to be analytic people. Now, for decades, Cuba and Venezuela have been at the center of political and economic conflict involving the United States and its allies. At the same time, Caribbean governments are increasingly engaging with international development frameworks such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, while military cooperation between major powers and Caribbean states continues to expand. Are these separate developments, or are they connected parts of a larger geopolitical struggle for influence in the region? Now, we have to become very, very abreast and knowledgeable of what is happening in the world. And for that reason, I'm here with this very important discussion. As tensions rise across the Caribbean, many are asking whether the region is entering a new era of geopolitical confrontation. From decades of pressure on Cuba and Venezuela to expanding military exercises, foreign naval deployments, and the growing influence of major powers, the Caribbean is becoming increasingly important in global politics, and we are being recolonized, as it were. At this point in time, they don't even have to fight, right? Because the Caribbean people are just as passive as anybody else, and our governments are busily selling out every major assets of each country. In this discussion, we examine the historical campaign against Cuba, the ongoing pressure on Venezuela, the role of Agenda 2030 in shaping regional development, and whether increased military activity represents security cooperation or a deeper struggle to control and influence. Are Caribbean nations truly sovereign, or are they being pulled into a new geopolitical contest between competing global powers? Join the conversation and share your thoughts below. Very important that you begin to share your thoughts and to be able to engage in these critical discourses. So, good afternoon. For more than 60 years, Cuba has faced sanctions, isolation efforts, covert operations, and relentless political pressure. Venezuela, for more than 2 decades, has faced its own campaign of sanctions, diplomatic battles, economic warfare, and international confrontation. At the same time, the Caribbean is becoming increasingly militarized. Foreign warships visit regional ports, military exercises expand, security agreements multiply, major powers compete for influence in a region long considered strategically vital. Many observers argue these developments are not isolated events, and many people think that they are because of the lack of critical analysis. You know, there are people who send me videos, and I watch some of the videos that are coming out of the Caribbean. And all you're doing is you're not necessarily analyzing and connecting the dots. And there's a difference between telling what a story is about and analyzing the story. And I'm finding that many people who even have PhDs, master's PhDs, and other advanced degrees are not able to analyze. They think their thing is to come and tell me and what happened and the gossip surrounding what is happening. But the fact is that we have to do proper analysis in terms of connecting the dots, which many of us aren't able to do. They believe they are part of a broader struggle over who will control the future of the Caribbean and Latin America. And that is what the struggle is all about. Who is going to be the dominant power? Is it the United States, China, Russia? This afternoon, we ask a simple question. If Cuba and Venezuela are today's targets, who could be next? The Caribbean and the history of militarization, we have to look at that because this is something that we need to talk about. And there is a scholar from St. Lucia, I forgot his name, but I'm going to look for his name, look up his name to see if we can do an interview and to explicate what really is happening and to give us a historic analysis of the militarization of the Caribbean. He has been suggesting that a long time ago, including, and Canada is also engaged in that. To understand today's events, we must first understand history. The Caribbean has never simply been a collection of islands. It has been one of the world's most important strategic regions. For centuries, European empires fought for control of Caribbean territories because whoever controlled the Caribbean controlled trade routes, military access, and economic wealth. Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands all competed for dominance. After the decline of the European colonial power, the United States emerged as the dominant external force in the region. And somebody sent me a message, was it yesterday, to tell me that it's King Charles who controls Jamaica. It's King Charles who is the head of state. And on paper, that is so. But England is a vassal state of the United States, and that has been said for years. This is a documented fact. All of these Western European countries are vassal states of the United States of America. In fact, the United States has military bases in England and also in Germany. Okay, so you must understand who controls who. Does Germany or does England have military bases in the United States? No, that's not allowed. Okay? The Spanish-American War of 1898 marked a turning point, and we have been through, and I need you to memorize these things so that you can become informed and you will sound intellectual at the same time. Cuba formally gained independence, but American influence remained enormous. The United States established military facilities throughout the region and increasingly viewed the Caribbean as part of a strategic sphere of influence. And we talked about the days of Theodore Roosevelt, right? In last week's live. If you were there, you can go. Is the Caribbean independent? Is it sovereign? I did a live last Friday. You can go and rewatch that video because that is something that you need to understand. The Caribbean is not a sovereign. They're not sovereign states. During the Cold War, the Caribbean became a front line in the global struggle between capitalism and communism. The Cuban Revolution of 1959 transformed the region. Suddenly, a government aligned with the Soviet Union sat only 90 miles from Florida. The Bay of Pigs invasion followed. Then came the Cuban Missile Crisis. For a brief moment, the world stood on the edge of nuclear war. From that point onward, Caribbean security became deeply intertwined with global power politics. And that is what we have been having since the Cold War. And, it was interesting as I was reading a book by Avram Manhattan yesterday on why did the United States go to that country there, to Vietnam. Okay, why did we go to Vietnam? That was a book written by Avram Manhattan. And he suggested that, they wanted from the 1940s, after the World War II, after World War II, to have to create, a hot war, from a Cold War to a hot war, that they would have even started World War III, according to what he's suggesting, in 1949 and beyond. But, there was some pushback against that. So these guys have been at it for a long time and they don't want to reduce the population, and they do not want to kill as many people as they can, while they are actually trying to appropriate and to get as much of the natural resources of these countries. Since 1960, Cuba has lived under one of the most extensive sanctions regimes in modern history. And this is in the Caribbean, by the way. Supporters of the sanctions argue that they are intended to pressure the Cuban government on democracy and human rights. Critics argue they have primarily framed ordinary Cubans while failing to achieve political change. Regardless of where one stands politically, one fact is clear. The conflict with Cuba has lasted longer than many wars. Generation after generation has lived under economic restrictions, political pressure, and diplomatic confrontation. And I'm wondering, how have they done that? How have they been able to survive generations after generations seeing the same thing? It is not easy, right? And many of us sit in our respective countries, enjoying our respective freedoms, being able to do whatever we want to do, and yet still we celebrate what is happening in Cuba. What are we doing to help to help what is happening in Cuba, to relieve the Cubans of their sufferings? I saw, this Black African American I invited her some time ago on this program, and I think she's the editor of the Black Agenda Report. And she was talking about in solidarity with Cuba. Yeah, we can be in solidarity with Cuba. But what are we doing? Because it's easy for her to sit in the United States, enjoy her freedom, being able to have some amount of economic freedom and to, travel wherever she wants to go, and talk about being in solidarity with the Cubans. We have got to stop being hypocritical. Now, we can be in solidarity in terms of suggesting that, they are no threat. Cuba is no threat to the Caribbean and the United States of America. That we can definitively say, because we have lived with Cuba for many years, haven't we? And Cuba has not invaded any of these Caribbean territories, has she? I don't think she has. For many in the global South, Cuba became a symbol of resistance against foreign domination. For others, it became a symbol of authoritarian government. The debate continues today, and Cuba has her faults, just like Jamaica has, Trinidad or Barbados. We cannot simply hold a country and talk about black and white and those who are evil versus those who are not evil. And this is the type of secular religious conversation that I'm seeing, people are engaged in. You have the victim versus the victimizer. That is what we have turned, intellectual debates and understanding of the world into a simplistic, analysis that probably one would do at the elementary level. The story of Venezuela is different but connected. Venezuela possesses some of the world's largest oil reserves. Under Hugo Chavez and later Nicolas Maduro, the country pursued a political path that frequently placed it at odds with Washington. And we saw what happened at the kidnapping rather, of Nicolas Maduro and his wife. So these are the economic sanctions were intensified, political tensions escalated, the country's economic crisis deepened, and we saw where the USS Gerald Ford was sent to Trinidad, and shortly thereafter, Maduro was captured. And people are still here today questioning, oh, you're spreading disinformation because you're saying the USS Nimitz is in Jamaica, and that it might be there in its effort to capture Raul Castro and to dethrone the Cuban Revolution. There are individuals who are still suggesting that that is misinformation. And how did I get that? Because the USS Nimitz went to other country. Okay, and it has nothing to do with Cuba. And those were the arguments when the USS Gerald Ford was also dispatched to Trinidad. Naysayers, critics were suggesting that that is not there. It was just there to, of course, to strengthen the security bilateral agreements between Trinidad and the United States of America. Because, and we will never grow up. We forget easily, we suffer from political amnesia. The country's economic crisis deepened, and we saw that supporters of sanctions argue they are necessary responses to governance failure. So they impose sanctions, allow your country to be demolished, essentially, and then they invade. So Cuba is now ripe for invasion. My understanding that there is not even any energy there, there's no oil. So how do the people survive? How are the hospitals surviving? It must be a nightmare in Cuba. So this is the ripe time for invasion. They have been planning this for centuries, you know. Well, not centuries, for decades, right? They have been planning this for decades. But Venezuela's importance extends beyond politics. Energy remains one of the most strategic resources in the world. Control over energy resources has shaped international conflicts for generations. And that is why the United States is in Iran, right? That is why she went to Syria. And she's targeting all countries with precious resources, natural resources, so that the more she has, but particularly energy, because without energy, the global economy cannot run, cannot function. Okay? So almost they're talking about climate change and they want renewable energy. They're just saying that to calm you down. They don't want any renewable, these guys don't want any renewable energy. Renewable energy for you, but not for them. All right? They want to control oil. And without oil, unless something replaces oil, and oil now is as we say, it's the black gold. Unless something replaces the black gold, oil is going to be a very important natural resource right down to the end of times. Okay? So what is Agenda 2030? That's what we're going to look at today in this afternoon's program also. Agenda 2030 is a United Nations framework adopted in 2015. It consists of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These goals include ending poverty. Can we end poverty? Improving healthcare, expanding education, but are we educated or are we being indoctrinated? Promoting gender equality, developing sustainable energy, addressing climate change, protecting the environment, and supporters see Agenda 2030 as a blueprint for improving human development worldwide. Critics raise concerns about sovereignty, arguing that international institutions and global organizations may gain greater influence over national decision making. The debate is not whether Agenda 2030 exists. It does. The debate is whether its implementation strengthens or weakens local democratic control. That question remains contested. And you're the ones who will have to go and dig deeper in terms of what they're doing. But as we continue this, I want to show you this. Hopefully, I'll be able to share my screen. Sometimes my screen acts up, so please bear with me. So I'm sharing my screen right now. And we're going to be looking at this Agenda 2030 in terms of the divvying up of the world into 10 different locations. All right. And this is prophetic, by the way. Those of you who don't, if you're reading this is prophetic. Okay. So we have the world divided into 10 regions. The Club of Rome, founded in 1968, the Club of Rome is a global think tank that covers a variety, okay, of Rome is made up of scientists, economists, business leaders, high-ranking international officials, head of state, and all of these five, and the heads of state from five continents who are convinced, rather, that the future of humanity, rather, is not determined once and for all, and that every human being can contribute to the improvement of our societies. And look at how they have divvied up the world, right, into the 10 different locations, to different regions, not locations, but 10 different regions. And you can fill in, you can take a world map and fill in how they're doing. And they are moving on as they create these wars, they are gaining traction. All right, so we have in the first one, we would have NAFTA, the United States, Canada, and Mexico. We know that that has been done from the 1990s, right? The EU countries, that was also done in was it the latter part of the 80s or 90s? We had the EU coming in, countries of European Union, Western Europe as a whole. So the European Union is also a part of that divvying up of the world. Japan is by itself. We have Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa will be one region. Okay, so that's how they are planning it to divide us so that we can become more controllable. Okay, number 5, we have Eastern Europe, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Russia, and the former countries of the Soviet Union. So here, Russia is not fully conquered. Okay, we can see Afghanistan, perhaps some parts of Eastern Europe, if not all of it, controlled by the Western people and their. But this is a global sort of agenda. So all these, billionaires are also involved in it. Central and South America, Cuba, and the Caribbean islands. So Cuba is here, right? And all of us will be linked in the 6th region, Central and South America, Cuba, and the Caribbean islands. All right, and Cuba was not a part of the agenda, but now is going to be a part of that agenda. Number 7, the Middle East and North Africa. And we can see that that is why they're trying not to conquer every country in the Middle East, and they will be merging it with North Africa. The rest of Africa, except for South Africa, because we saw that South Africa will be with Australia, New Zealand, all right, that they will be in that sort of region. Southern and Southeastern Asia, including India. We have China by itself here. Mongolia is now included with China. The islands of the Thammaris, in its greatest part, fits with the closest region. All right, so this is what these so-called global elites are planning in their agenda, for their agenda 2030. Very important that you understand that. And there's something here that I should share with you, right? Because it's very, very important that we begin to read for ourselves, understand, because that is how we are going to accumulate what is called sabiduría, which is wisdom, entendimiento, right? And our understanding. Okay, so let's look at this chapter here, which is very, very interesting. All right. Now, Revelation begins and talks about the kings and whatever of that will be controlling the world. But as it continues here, right, it says in Revelation 17, verse 12, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings. Now, in the Bible, kings and kingdoms are often associated with a beast. Okay, so here we're seeing essentially what they're forming is 10 kingdoms. So these different regions. So you'll have like the North American Union of the NAFTA, where you saw the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Okay, with the NAFTA, which was formed in the 1990s, right? So you're going to have and secure, and that is why Trump he kept on saying that, Canada was the 51st. Well, every country, according to him, is on the 51st. Any country captured by the United States and under U.S. influence under Donald Trump's, from his perspective, is now a 51st state of the United States. See, it's a joke. But the fact of the matter is that these, global elites are planning up and are successfully doing so at dividing up the world, right? And I'm sure that some of the people that you consider to be your enemies are also involved in the whole scheme. That is what you have to understand, because that is how we are going to be able, as I'm suggesting, to be controlled. So we have, and the 10 horns, which thou sawest, are 10 kings. You can say 10 kingdoms as well, because they're going to be somebody who is going to be able to, to lead, to rule over those different regions, which have received no kingdom as yet. And it has not been officially formed. Okay? But receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Okay? And that is before the return of Christ. 1 hour, which prophetically means that it's not going to be long. Maybe a day, maybe a couple of days, I don't know. All right? So these have one mind. What do you? These have one mind. So it does not mean that they're China or they're Japan or it's Cuba or it's Jamaica. They have one mind. Yes, you still have these countries, don't get me wrong. Right? And I don't think they're going to ever be able to unite the world in which they are suggesting and pretending, but they are going to try and they're going to force. And that is essentially how we're going to have the mark of the beast. Because it's either you submit to it or you don't. And if you don't, you will be killed. Okay? So these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. Right? They are going to give their power and strength unto the beast. Look at what they're saying. These shall make war with the Lamb. So this is a religious war. This is going to wind up into a religious war. Una guerra religiosa. That is what it's going to end up being, or it's going to end up becoming. And the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns, which present the 10 regions here, we're seeing the formation of the 10 horns, which thou sawest upon the beast. These shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. Now, who is this whore? The Bible tells us that is the Roman power, right? The Roman power. And we can see papal Rome now having a comeback, I should say, flexing her muscles worldwide, globally, not only in the United States, but around the world. Now, many people aren't aware of what the Roman power is doing. You don't talk about that. We talk about the Jews, right? The Jews and the Zionists. But nobody is talking about the Roman papal power. And this is why the people are going to be deceived, and then they're going to turn on her. So all of these regions and the kings and the presidents and the prime ministers of the world are going to turn on her because they would have seen that they were deceived by the power. So even those people like the Barack Obamas and the Donald Trumps of the world, if they're alive to see all of this prophetic undertaking, they might have been deceived and they're going to be angry. Right? You see them as sophisticated and you think because they're in Freemasonry and the Illuminati, they understand what is happening, but they don't. Many of them don't. A few of them may, but many of them don't even know what they are doing. They just love power and it makes them feel important. Okay? What we're seeing here, they are going to turn on the beast and they shall hate the whore, which is the Roman Catholic papacy, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Wow. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, unto the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is the great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. There's no other city in the world that has reigned over kings, skilled them, controlled them, as the Vatican has and is still doing. None. None. A small city, right? And even the presidents of the United States have to kneel at the coffin of a dead pope. And you think that the world is what you think it is? But, we are told that there is going to be wars and rumors of wars, and that we must be prepared for that. And we're seeing these things as they are trying to deceive us. So here is where perspectives diverge. Some analysts argue that the conflicts involving Cuba and Venezuela are fundamentally about democracy, governance, and human rights. Others argue something much larger is taking place. They believe the real struggle is over resources, strategic territory, economic systems, and political independence. From this perspective, the issue is not simply Cuba. It is not simply Venezuela. It is about who controls the future of entire regions. And we have just looked at the 10 regions that they are dividing the world up into according to Agenda 2030. By the way, if you read the history of the United Nations, if you understand the purpose of the United Nations, you will see that she is more religious than political. But many of you don't know that too because we don't learn that at university. Supporters of this view argue that powerful economic interests increasingly seek influence over land, energy, infrastructure, and natural resources, and strategic trade routes. Whether one agrees with that interpretation or not, it reflects concerns shared by many people throughout the Caribbean and the global South. Today, Guyana is attracting global attention because of its massive oil discoveries. Jamaica remains strategically positioned along major shipping routes, and it's also saying that it has also discovered oil. Trinidad and Tobago remains a major energy producer. Haiti remains vulnerable to external intervention and internal instability. The entire Caribbean sits at the intersection of economic, military, and geopolitical interests. That reality raises an important question. If pressure can be applied to Cuba, if pressure can be applied to Venezuela, which it has and was successfully taken over by the United States, what happens when other Caribbean nations pursue policies that conflict with the interests of powerful states or corporations? What will happen to them? They also will be invaded. And I think this sort of military posturing that we're seeing in the Caribbean now is sending that message to all Caribbean leaders. The Caribbean is once again becoming a center of global attention. Military activity is increasing. Competition among major powers is intensifying. Economic interests are expanding. The future of the region may depend on whether Caribbean nations can maintain sovereignty while navigating the interests of larger global actors. The question is not simply what happens to Cuba. The question is not simply what happens to Venezuela, or what happened, I should say, more specifically and more accurately. The question is, what kind of Caribbean will emerge in the decades ahead? And who will ultimately decide its future? These are the essential questions, the critical questions that need to be posed. And we're not hearing these sort of conversations in the Caribbean. what we're seeing is as I'm saying, with the recounting of what is happening, the surface level interpretation and analysis. But that is what our Caribbean people citizens like. And then they're going to realize that the people who they think are in control are not the ones. In fact, the people at the upper echelons, those who are in power, so the Barack Hussein Obamas and all these people, some of these very people are deceived. Some of the kings and the presidents of the world are deceived, and they are going to, as the Bible predicts, create a war against the whore who gave them the power and their seats of authority. Let me know your comments in the comments below, right? Your thoughts, I should say, not in the comments, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you believe is next, and what should Caribbean nations do to protect their sovereignty? Join the conversation. Very important that you do that, and share the video, most importantly, that the algorithm will be jolted to send and to push the video along the system. Adios.